When you are in a state or situation of deprivation, when you get what you need, your happiness goes up. The more that you get what you need when you're in a state of deprivation, of food, of shelter, of clothing, of some kind of financial need, when you get what you need, your happiness goes up. The more you get, the happier you are. Until you're not. That's actually what social scientist and Harvard professor Arthur Brooks has been talking about with partners of his from Harvard who have been doing this longitudinal study called the Happiness Project. And here's what he said. It's very interesting. He said, when we find ourselves, perhaps if we are in dire need, like I said, of food, shelter, or clothing, or perhaps even, let's say, in the earlier stages of life where we're trying to get a first job, or we're trying to establish ourselves and be able to sustain ourselves and pay for rent and food and clothing, as we get those things, he said, yes, your happiness increases. But the problem is, he said, your body literally is tricked in that moment to thinking this: the more I get, the happier I will be. And he said, after a while, as we're out of that state of deprivation, maybe out of that state of desperate need, and we've leveled off, we can keep getting more, but happiness isn't increasing. And yet, he said, we think that it does, because our body learned that, perhaps early in life, or perhaps if we were in very dire circumstances or places of need. But also because the other thing we learned in that place was that this feeling of need is a terrible feeling. And we want to get as far away from that as possible. We want to insulate ourselves from that. I think I'm not alone in saying I don't like feeling in a place of deprivation or need. Nobody does. And so even physiologically, we want to remove ourselves from that. What's interesting is, even as we grow into a place of perhaps having all that we need, we still are insulating ourselves from the feelings of deprivation or desperation or being in need. And so we leave certain communities and move out of one place into another place because we want to live in a better community, in a place that doesn't remind us of need. We build communities in a sense to insulate ourselves from this. You have certain neighborhoods and places, or we tend to live life with people in a sense who are at the same standard of living or in the same social class or whatever that looks like. That just kind of happens in part because nobody likes to feel like they're in need. One of the other interesting things that they find as they research wealth and as it grows in individuals or households or communities is that as wealth increases, or let's say as all of our needs are met, social distance increases from those perhaps whose needs are not met. And in communities and life circles and friend circles, and as social distance increases, in other words, as you spend more and more time with people who are in the same social class and stage of life in you, your empathy for people who you are socially distant from goes down. In other words, you can't relate to their difficulties as much. You don't feel like what it feels like to feel like them. And the part of the reason is, let's say, we don't want to feel like that. I bring this up to you because this isn't just a dynamic that's in play in our world and in a country like ours, or perhaps even in communities like ours here at The Well in Bolton and King City and Vaughan, where many of us, not all of us, but many of us are living in a place where we can say, yeah, most of our needs are met, where we are in middle to upper class neighborhoods and communities. I don't only bring that up because that's our reality, but we are in a conversation and have been for several weeks on this idea of welcome. What does it mean to engage regularly in the practices of radical hospitality? And for our purposes, we've been defining this word welcome as not just, or hospitality, not just sort of making a meal for someone or even just sort of being kind, but this idea of noticing, seeing, valuing, prioritizing, moving towards, with love and compassion, those in need. And I think one of the things that we need to just say about that is the reason that's difficult is not just because we're busy or not just because we're worried or preoccupied with life. We've talked about how some of those things can be obstacles to welcome. But part of it is we work in many ways to insulate ourselves from people and places in need. I think in part subconsciously because we don't want to be reminded of what it feels like to be in need. We don't want to be exposed to that. But as we have been coming back to over and over and over again, what does it mean for us if you consider yourself a person of faith, a follower of Jesus, someone who believes in God, someone who follows, in a sense, the story of Scripture? What does it mean for us that God, the God we worship, Jesus, chose to put himself in a place of need? That's the story of Scripture, that God actually left a place of abundance, in a sense, in the heavenly realms, or his place of comfort as the creator and sustainer of all things, to come into the world he created, in a sense, to put himself in a place of need. And not just because he became human, but because he actually became a baby and weak and in a place of need. And a baby is in a state of deprivation and needs everything from everyone around them. But also to be in a poor family, in a poor part of the country where he lived in, and in a time when the people group that he was born to were in major state of deprivation and desperation. What does it mean that God chose to do that and identify himself with that people and with that community? It actually tells us that we are meant to rethink ourselves and what we choose to do as his followers, that this is a God who would say, these are the people that I'm most with and most like. And we did kind of a part one of this conversation last week where we read from a passage of Scripture that I actually want to read from again. We don't often do that, where we read from the same passage of Scripture in 2 weeks in a row. I'm not just being lazy, okay, as a pastor. This is such a significant passage of Scripture when it comes to welcome. And I said to you, we couldn't have this conversation about what it means for us to be a people of welcome, to practice radical hospitality. We couldn't have this conversation without looking at this particular passage. Because this is a passage that is not a description about Jesus' life, but it's actually a passage that Jesus tells us how he would describe our lives. In other words, when he looks back at the end of days, and this is a passage where he's talking about at the end of life, or at the end of this life, before the life to come. How would he see our lives as he looked back on them in terms of where does he see us and where he sees himself in it? And I want you to listen to this passage, even if you missed last week, even if you've never read this passage before, on what it means that God chose to put himself in a place of need, identify himself with people of need. Listen to how Jesus describes him doing that. And this is him talking about in the end of days. When the Son of Man comes in all his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So don't get caught up with all the shepherd language. Just think about God gathering all people before him. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry, or feed you? Or thirsty, and give you something to drink? Or a stranger, and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" Listen. And the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did that, the visitation, the caring, the feeding, the clothing, the friendship, to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters," in other words, the ones in a greatest state and place of need and deprivation, when you did it for them, you were doing it for me. For me. I said to you last week, what's so clear to us, even if you've never read this passage before, is that this is a passage of welcome. It even uses the words hospitality, of welcoming those, moving towards those, noticing those, prioritizing those, valuing those, loving those, showing compassion to those who are in need, in any kind of need. And in a sense, this isn't an exhaustive list. It's just a description of many of the people in our world who are in all kinds of need of food, of clothing, of friendship, of visitation, who are incarcerated, who are in tough. Secondly, Jesus is close to them. He identifies himself in particular with this group of people, not in some magic way of like Jesus in disguise or some mysterious thing. Like you give someone who's hungry food and it jumps out, oh, it turned out it was Jesus after all. He's just saying, hey, I am so close to them. I more identify with this group of people. I'm not afraid to move towards those with need, that to welcome them is to welcome me. That's what Jesus is saying here, unmistakably. If you want to follow me, I think is the great implication in this. If you want to follow me, if we want to be a community of Jesus followers, and in fact, if you're here, even you're like, hey, I'm just exploring faith, you can say, yeah, this is all for all the rest of you. You guys better listen. But maybe this will give you a sense of what are we talking about when we talk about faith or following Jesus. He says, if you want to follow me, you are also going to fight the urge to insulate yourself from people in need and protect yourself from feeling that or being aware of it. You are going to fight the drift towards being with people who are like me or running away from places of need. You're going to move towards them and identify yourself with people in need. I bring this up in particular, not just because we're in this series, but because we are at a time of year where we call our Live on Mission Week, where we as a community recognize Jesus is on a mission in this world to move towards people like this, to bring his message and tangible expressions of hope and life and forgiveness and healing and restoration. As he is remaking all things in our world, he invites us to join him. He's the leader. It's his mission. It's his agenda. It's his idea. But he invites us to join him in that mission. And what does it mean for us as we live on mission to consciously choose to move towards people who are in a great state of need and deprivation? As I said, all of us in this room, in a sense, can say, oh yeah, at times I need something. But for the most part, and for most of us in our community, and I know a good number of you, for the most part, we would not describe our lives as people who are in a state of deprivation. And so what does it mean for us to we have to interrupt the normal cycle of life to actually even be close to people who are in that place and know what's going on in their lives and grow in our empathy, our understanding, and also in our ability to do something about their needs. And so we've been talking about that last week and this week as we have partners that we do that with. And today, I want to spend actually the rest of our time in a conversation. There's been someone else sitting here this whole time, Dave Mast, who, and I want to talk about our partnership with Lisette Lavoie and the Shalom Home in Guinea, West Africa. And so I've asked Dave to kind of just join me for the rest of this conversation as we talk about what does it mean for us to partner with them. So before I kind of ask Dave some questions, and you can get to know a little bit of him and why he's involved in this and why he's involved in this conversation. This is a ministry that we were privileged to find or to be connected with back in 2010. And so one person from our church actually was going on kind of a vacation with a purpose. They were interested in maybe going to the Galapagos Islands, and I sent them to Guinea, West Africa, to a center, a place with no running water and electricity, to meet with someone who was actually a Canadian woman, Lisette Lavoie, who at the age of 40, she's in her 70s now, but at the age of 40 moved out to Guinea, West Africa. And as she was bringing the good news of Jesus to people who were in a place of need and deprivation, she met a couple who were taking in children who were affected or infected by HIV. And at that time, and even when Nadine, who was from our church, was there in 2010, they were in a house. They had a few kids in actually the house of this Ghanaian couple. And Lisette, our friend from Canada, who had moved over there, was helping them. Well, that subsequently turned into the Kids in Crisis Center, which then we've sent several teams actually to be a part of. And I was able to take a team there a number of years ago that had a couple of rented townhomes where the center was growing to around anywhere between 20 to 30 children. and then now has become the Shalom Home, where they have property, and there's 25 kids now at the center, kids who are infected or affected by HIV, and actually, in fact, orphans of Ebola. So when the Ebola virus ripped through Guinea, we were literally about to send a team there, and the day before we had to cancel that trip. They ended up going later, but because of Ebola that was happening in West Africa, and there were many more, sadly, orphans as parents were dying and children were disenfranchised and dislocated. Some of them ended up at the center as well. And so for the rest of our time, Dave and I are going to talk about what it means for us as a church to live on mission and join Lizette and the Kids in Crisis Center. Dave was part of the team that most recently went there. So I'm just going to invite you to join this conversation as we kind of carry it on. So Dave, thank you for being here. Maybe you could just introduce yourself, how long you've been a part of the church, and then how you got connected with Guinea and the Kids in Crisis Center.
Good question. Yeah, we've been part of the church for 20 years, since we were at Rexdale and started in Vaughan. And with the Center Kids of Christ, it was about 16 years ago, as you said. We started connecting with Lizette, and remember the first markets when my kids were little, doing the little market, and now they're old. But yeah, it's been a while since we've been doing it. And we had a bit of a break there with COVID. We weren't able to stay as connected. And I was really happy a year ago we were able to connect again and send a team and get over there and see what's happening.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, and you talk about 2010, and I remember when one of the guys in our denomination and I had said to him, hey, we're looking for an international partner to work with who's doing this kind of work, the holistic good news of Jesus, in terms of teaching, helping, feeding, clothing, caring. And he said, well, we have an opportunity with this woman, Lizette, and the Kids in Crisis Center, but you guys have to be in this for the long haul. This is not hey, come in, give some money, send a team, and go do something else. And that was really good that he said that at the beginning, because it was like, yeah, that's what we want to do. I talked about Ebola, you talked about COVID. There were times when we weren't able to send, but I just love the fact that we've been tracking with this ministry for 16 years. So Dave's wife, Nicole, was on the team that I took, I think, was it 2015 or 2013?
Yeah, about 10 years ago.
Yeah. And then Dave, you recently took a team last year.
Yeah.
And there's 5 of you that went. So I just want to, talk to you about your own experience with that, what you've seen, and then you've also been in ongoing conversations with Lizette about where the center is at and what the needs are. One of the things that I know you and I talked about was this place is like a place of welcome. I mean, it was when they were in the house. It was when they were in the townhome. It's now when they're on this kind of 10 lot. Like, how big is do you know how big it's a couple acres now or something like that?
It's good size.
Yeah. How do you, when you're going to there, and this was the first time you had gone, how did you notice that as like, oh yeah, this is a place of welcome? Like, what did you notice when you were there?
That's a good question. I think when I first got there, I saw like physical things that I thought, like, we need to fix this immediately. Like there was broken toys that we may have shipped a long time ago over, things needed painting. But by the end of the time I was there, I just saw like how happy the kids were. Like the kids are loved, the kids are cared for. There's a doctor that comes on site. They come home from school and they're playing with their brothers and sisters. Like it's really a safe environment, like in those walls of their property, a safe environment for the kids just to be kids and to grow up together as a big family. Mm-hmm.
So there's, just context, there's 25 kids there right now. What would be the ages, like you saw all of them?
Yeah, they range from one little one, about 1 year old, all the way up to a 19-year-old. Yeah.
Wow. So what's interesting was there were a lot of babies in the earlier years. And Lizette was taking those in, and the people running that center, because a lot of people weren't. So what are some of the challenges that they're having? Like, why are kids coming into the center in the first place?
Yeah, the original center, as you were saying, it was almost all babies. Like, you see those photos of the floor was just covered with babies laying and playing, and now I have more appreciation for really what that was back then. Like those were babies, like some of them with disabilities, some of them with HIV, and like Lazar and Faith just took them in. Like, they just broke their heart, and like police would bring the babies to them and took them in. And now, like, through so many more time talking with the orphanages in Guinea, like, babies are hard. Like, they're expensive, they take a lot of time. And it's a challenge for them to take in babies. So what Lazar did Lazar and Faith did at the beginning, like, I can't imagine what the burden they took on to do that.
Yeah, I mean, they literally. So you talked about the kids at the center who have HIV. They're not going anywhere. right? Because the meds that they need, they couldn't get apart from the center. So in fact, many of you who have participated in the market yesterday, raising funds for that, part of what we said was, hey, it's $1,200 per child per year for the education, but also for the medicine, because, like Dave said, there's a doctor on site, but the HIV meds are expensive. And so those kids couldn't go anywhere, but now they've grown up. So as you look at the center now, some of the pictures you saw when they're babies, you went there now. What did you see that's reflective of, oh, this center's growing, and we've been able to grow with it?
Yeah, the kids are older, and I think it's presenting new challenges. Like they're working right now on getting a separate facility for some of the older boys to move in so they can have their own space and be a little more closer to the gate for some freedom. And then they're also looking at opportunities for the older kids. Like, so there's apprentices that some of the kids are doing in town at salons and some trades. And they're looking at building a convenience store on the property that some of the kids can work in too. So like, how do you not just stop caring for the kids as they get older, but how do you help them transition into life?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things you said to me as you were coming back was like, yeah, these kids they're not going somewhere else, most of them, because this is their family. And you talk about brother and sister, it really is, right? It's their family, which is remarkable, but also they need the meds that we and many others are continuing to provide. One of the cool things, and hopefully we'll have a picture on the screen here, but the basketball court that's been built on this property, you said that was pretty cool just to see what was happening there as they even built that out.
Yeah, so an American group helped build this basketball court on the property, concrete, it's solid. And so every day, like all the kids are playing on it, and you see the little ones playing, and like the older brothers and sisters, like they're playing basketball right over them. They all kind of coexist on this court. But the interesting that's happened like, unintentionally is like it's become this huge outreach thing where they can get 10, 20 kids from the neighborhood walk pretty far to come in and play basketball. So every night and on the weekends, there's guys playing and women playing on the basketball court, and they're playing late, they're playing intense, and it's a bit of an outreach now that's started for the center.
What strikes me about this, and just talking to Lizette, and we'll talk about Lazar in a moment, but the vision of how this thing grew and whatever was needed to make this a place of welcome. Like in one sense, it's a place of, they have to have guards. They're insulating, they're actually protecting the children. Some of the children they actually have who are kids now, where the police would call them because the risk of them, the babies getting trafficked or whatever, or children just being dropped off or abandoned. So there was a safety component, but I love to see how this is also a welcoming place, and Lizette's really trying to make this a place of safety and refuge for the community at large. And that's what's really cool about the lots that they have. I think some of the pictures you showed, there's a lot of empty space there. So the convenience store is one of the things they're trying to build, which would actually serve the community because the community needs some of that. What are some of the other things that they're thinking about kind of along with that, or where they see maybe that property going?
That's good. Yeah, so the property is just at the edge of the city, but all around it hasn't been developed. So right now, the houses are starting to go up around the city. So some of the immediate things they're seeing is as they're doing the construction in the buildings, the workers are living in these construction, like as their houses are getting built. So at Christmas, for example, they did a big outreach and they provided meals and a bit of an event for all the people that are around the facility now. So there's a lot of opportunity as that area develops, how they can be to care for the needy in the area, to provide that store that they want to kind of have a little store to provide work and a little bit of revenue for the center, and as well as in that they want to build a little chapel, so there'll be a place somewhere they can share the gospel out of on that property.
You said something too, which is really interesting. Was we think about this place obviously as a place of need that we're giving to, but Lizette and her team are seeing that they have means to meet the needs. So we're giving, but they're giving what we're giving. Like obviously, they're keeping what we're giving them to help them with the center, but then all of the more that they have, and they're involved in actually giving to those who have even far less, which I just think that's so important for us, because when we talked about, like, sometimes when we don't have needs, we don't empathize with those who do. We can insulate ourselves from that. But sometimes when we do have need, we can also downplay the impact we could have for others around us who have even more need than we do. Like if we're in a place of need or deprivation, we just are focused on, well, what do I need? And yet so often we realize, no, God's way of doing this is as you give, you freely give as you have freely received. And you said that was so cool to see. You guys were part of something that happened there while you were there in terms of that kind of distribution or sharing what they received. Just talk about that for a moment, because that is a really cool, I think, example of that.
Oh yeah, so when we went, we'd raised some money to do a food distribution where we provided food for 25 orphanages, about 900 kids for 1 month. Amazing. And so one day we had all the rice and sardines and tomato paste, onions and different things delivered. And one of the highlights was seeing Lizette's smile, because she'd worked really hard on this, and knowing that she was going to be able to bless all these orphanages, some who were struggling due to some economic things in the area at the time. She was so happy to be able to bless them with it. And then the next day, each orphanage came in one at a time to pick up their goods, and seeing how excited they were and thankful for bags of rice that are going to feed their orphanage for a month. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. I'll never forget something Lizette said to us early on. And again, I know because we raise money for this every year. And of course, there's lots of ways that we want to participate in them. But the money is one of the ways that she said, oh, we love your money. It goes so far. And it really does. One of the other things I think that so just go ahead. Do you want to say something about that?
Oh, the money. The accountant in me. I think the center for a year runs on $120,000 for everything. For a school, for the doctor, for the food, for the workers, for the maintenance. But they're dependent on that. Without the money from a few Canadian churches and donors, this place doesn't exist. These kids don't have that place for home. And I think that really struck me. And they know how dependent they are on us. They're very well aware of it, that we support them and keep it going. And they're very grateful for it. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an interesting comment about well, how do we partner, right? Because on one level, people say, oh, well, we want to make sure that the teach a person to fish and versus give someone a fish. But at the same time, the need for partnership never goes away, because in one sense, they certainly are sustaining themselves in terms of the people and leadership that are there. But in another sense, the money practically, just for the costs of the HIV meds alone, the cost of education there for these kids, because that's just not available. And then, of course, the other people that they're serving and helping, the money reality is a big thing that we need to, and I want to get to that in a moment. One of the other things that you were really encouraged by when you went was by the new director for the center, Mariba. So just a bit of context, Dave mentioned earlier Lazar and Faith. So they were the couple that worked with Lizette initially as they were taking in kids, and Lizette worked with them and basically adopted them as her Ghanaian children, and then their children became her grandchildren, essentially, because Lizette went over there as a single woman, but she has a family now. But Lazar, tragically, a few years ago, passed away. And Lazar was an incredible force, just a really capable, strong, wise leader, was amazing kind of father for all these kids, 30-plus kids. And I got a chance to meet him and spent time with him. And many of the people that sent teams were blown away by him. But tragically, he passed away. And that was really hard for Lizette. I mean, she lost a son. And I think the center lost its heartbeat. That's what she said. He was the heartbeat of the center. And so I think for a couple of years, she and we were thinking, okay, well, what's going to happen? Because there's no substitute for that on-the-ground leadership. And especially if we are sending money, we want to know that, hey, there's someone there that knows how to receive this. And even for Lizette, she's in her 70s. She's not going to be around for another 25 years. I'm sure she would argue with me about that. But so there's a new director there at the center, Mariba. Tell me a little bit about him and how you felt to kind of just see him in action.
Yeah, Mariba's just an amazing man, and as you said, when Lazar passed away, everyone knew what's going to happen, right? But God provided Mariba. Mariba came to the center as a security guard, and the skills that this man has, we couldn't go and recruit and find. He's the leader of the overall center, all the staff, all the logistics, everything happens with it. He's, deals with all the facility maintenance and projects. He does Sunday school for the kids and teaches these kids about Jesus. And he's a father figure to the kids and just loves them and plays with them and hangs around with them. And there's no doubt in my mind that God brought him to that center. You couldn't find him. He's just a great man.
That's so good. And I think, Dave, what I felt from you when you came back and you were talking about this is not only were you encouraged to see that, but it's indicative of God's provision, like you said, for the center. And I think that's just really important for us to realize is there's things we can do and things we can't do. Often the things we can't do is what makes us feel powerless and then go, oh, well, we can't do anything. We can't help, But as we partner with them, it's God's displaying to us his ability to provide. As you said, no search firm in the world could have recruited someone like that and came as a security guard and ends up becoming the gift for the center for this next chapter and season. So I feel very encouraged to that. It's like we're raising money, we're sending teams, we're praying, but this is part of what we were praying about that. And at any point, and maybe this is just an encouragement to you in your own prayers, oftentimes the snapshot of what you're praying for, if you look at it, doesn't look like anything's happening. And at the moment that they would have hired Mariba as a security guard, no one's thinking he's going to be the new director of the center. So this is just amazing to see what God's doing. As you and I have talked, I think you're not just a finance guy, don't pigeonhole yourself. You love what's going on here. You're also a strategic thinker and you're a futurist. You're thinking about the future. You've been talking to Lizette about it, but also recognizing, Lizette's kind of in the final chapter in one sense, however long that's going to be. She's going to stay there. She's retired officially as an international worker, but she's not coming home. That's her home. But we have this new director of the center. What are some of the things that you've been thinking about of going, well, and maybe you don't have answers to these questions, but going the long-term viability of how we partner with them and what our role is? Just tell me a little bit about what's on your mind. And because that can just help us know how to pray.
Good question. I think for what we can do, again, the accountant in me, we need to give. Like they need our money, and as Lizette says, she likes to spend our money, and it's impactful what we do there. So they said the whole center runs off $120,000 a year for everything. And then on top of that, this year we're also trying to raise a further $100,000 with some of the building projects. So those are some of the things to work on there. I think other thing is we just need to stay connected with them. It's like we can't forget about these kids, and we haven't forgot about them over 16 years. But I think continue to send over small groups of people like that are in need of, we can help with child development, we can help with construction, people that speak French because all the kids speak French there. So if you can speak French, they also need help with fundraising. So anyway, like people with fundraising and also basketball. Like they love to have some people come over and run some basketball camps and teach some of these kids how to play basketball better. So I think, getting there, seeing them, because once you see these kids, you don't forget them. And I think we have a lot of people in our church who have been there and have held these kids as when they're little. And I think we need to keep that connection and pray, as you said, and give. Yeah.
So what are some of the prayer needs? We have people in our church who love to pray, and we obviously want to be praying regularly as a church for this. Obviously, some of the answers to prayer, Mariba. But what are maybe a couple of the key kind of prayer needs going forward?
Yeah, I think life in Guinea is hard. And I think there's a lot of immediate things with health and opportunities and just, what the future holds for these kids. But I think if I asked Lizette, she would say, pray for the kids to grow in their faith, to know Jesus, and then to go change Guinea. Really the heart of the center really is for these kids to know Jesus and to change Guinea through the gospel.
That's so good. And this is, why we partner with organizations and places and people like this is not just because we need them and they need us, but on the we need them side of things, it's hard. Welcome is hard. Like we've been talking about this, like what does it mean to have our whole lives actually pleasantly, beautifully disrupted by the good news of Jesus, to see our lives, our homes, our resources, our time as to be put in play. That's what I always say to people, don't give it away, put it in play. Use it for what God is doing in the world. To have a picture of an entire community, literally a place of welcome, where the whole space is given to that purpose, I think is meant to capture our imagination and our hearts, as you said, the opportunity to go there is to do that. But it gives us a picture, in one sense. I remember driving up to that place and like the amount of potholes on these roads, right? And even, we landed at the time, Nicole would have told you this, but like it was election time, 27 parties running. It was very politically unstable. So we're being picked up at the airport with armed guards and taken. And so there's lots of visual cues that you would say, oh, this is like a dangerous, unsafe place. But in the middle of this is this beautiful, almost heaven-like, and I'm not being romantic about it. It is hard. It is difficult. We were there when there was no AC, 38-degree heat, no running water. But what's happening there, like this, the radiance of these kids whose lives are being changed, lives are being dramatically altered from where they were headed into, as Lizette's vision to change this country. This is what the new creation looks like. It's this evidence of like God's kingdom. And this is what Jesus is saying, hey, I'm doing something new. The kingdom's right here. It starts now. Open your eyes to see it. So Dave kind of hinted at this, and I'll just say it even more directly. We want to keep sending teams to go. And so Dave said to me jokingly before we started filming, as soon as I get to 5, we're going. Like if I can get 5 people. But people ideally, who at least a few who can speak French, any of you who are trained in sort of like any early childhood education, or whatever, because just even for the older kids, the HIV, and this is sad, this is a virus that they didn't choose to get, they were born with, but it retards some of their ability to learn or gets in the way of it, impedes it, and so they need some extra help. And so people, that obviously just people who are willing to love, but then playing sports, running basketball programs, camps, those kind of things. So if you are interested in being part of the team, if you're okay if we put your email address on the screen? Okay, we're gonna put it on the screen. You can reach out to Dave. We're just trying to figure out, we want to get into a regular rhythm, at least hopefully once a year, to be able to send a team to do this. And then I just want to thank you for any of you that participated in the market, that gave yesterday to that. You can still give to that. Again, we're trying to raise like $1,200 per kid, covers all of their education, private schooling, and healthcare, and for many of them HIV meds for the year. And so if you want to be a part of meeting that goal, you can just give directly to that. If you give directly to that on our website or whatever, you can get a tax receipt for that. If you gave at the market, all the money that we raised yesterday for that goes towards this. So those are 2 of the practical ways. And then thirdly, just to continue to pray for the work that God is doing there, and pray for yourselves, for me, for us, for our church, that as we are partnering with people like this, that our own sense of wanting to insulate ourselves from need, and because we don't want to feel them, we don't know what to do, that Jesus will break that down beautifully, and that our hearts, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, need a bigger table, that our hearts would grow for the kind of welcome that he's calling us to have. So Dave, thanks for sharing this. Thanks for going there, taking the team there, and just for carrying, being one of the people, you're not the only one, but you're one of the people that's carrying a heart for this in our church.
Thanks, Vich.